three very prominent economists. First, Dr. Michael Lloyd of the Global Policy Institute and his own think tank, and Dr. Angelo Santagostino, Jean Monnet professor, and of course the world famous Francesco Forte, who is no doubt the odds-on favorite for the what do you call it, like the living memory of the European Union and the efforts to get it off the ground. So I want to start with Michael Lloyd's paper because I think that provides a very good overview. Then we go to Angelo Santagostino's paper, and then we'll have my paper on rent seeking as an objective in international treaty negotiations. And finally, for a wrap up and an extension by Francesco. So how do we proceed here? Go directly to Michael? Oh, well, I need to have that in front of me so I could fill you in on Michael. Michael has very impressive academic credentials. He's a leading political economist specializing in monetary, banking, and political economic analysis, principally in the European context. He has recently become involved in work on China. Want to advance that. He was founder of the LCA Europe Limited, which is a consulting firm, I think, and he's senior research fellow and associate director of the Global Policy Institute in London. He has wide experience from reading the website for these two organizations. He has been around these issues for many, many years and had very important positions. He's an advisor to the European Parliament, and has been, and he was around at the launch of the euro. He has published numerous articles, and he also participates very substantially in the blogosphere. Michael's paper initiates our session with a counterintuitive, at least politically speaking, conclusion. He argues that even though it is only a few months since the UK formally and practically left the European Union, the possibility of the UK rejoining the single European market looms large. His conclusion is, despite all the tensions associated with the UK and the EU over the COVID-19 vaccine supplies, the political and legal wrangles over the sea border imposed between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the various issues involved in the UK's internal market. He concludes that while these frictions will remain problems, the EU is likely to remain the UK's major trading partner, and the UK will stay in close regulatory alignment with its EU trading partners. Dr. Lloyd?
Right, okay. Well, I'm going to deal with four areas. First of all, the structural problems in Northern Ireland, which is, in fact, in the EU single European market. Second, gravity economic trade logic and the UK, or linking it to the UK and the EU. Third, the UK's pivot towards the Indo-Pacific in terms of trade positioning. And fourth, my suggestion that there is a scenario which is still a realistic one of the UK rejoining the SEM on certain conditions. Now, in terms of Northern Ireland, the UK EU trade arrangement, it's not really a deal. It was never finished as a deal. It basically, they just stopped talking to one another. And we're left with an arrangement which is in a constant state of flux and discussion on various unresolved issues like fisheries. But the arrangement also has Northern Ireland as part of the UK, straddling the single European market on the one hand and the UK internal market on the other. This bizarre arrangement was the choice of the current UK government during the negotiations, and it gives rise to a number of problems. I mean, some of these are, for instance, rules of origin, which, in order to determine whether something is actually a European, i.e. an EU, or a British product. There's a nice example can be given that of a meat pie, for example. It could involve a cow reared in Ireland, shipped to Scotland for slaughter, moved somewhere else to England to be processed, and hence re-enter Northern Ireland as minced beef, and then in Northern Ireland is made into the meat pie. Now, dependent on the value added in each of these stages, the meat pie could be European or it could be British. It's just, it sounds like a crazy example, but it's a realistic one. Now, part of the problem with Northern Ireland and the problem with the border, which is a sea border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, is that the UK decided to opt out of the sanitary and phytosanitary system of the EU, which entails, therefore, border checks to make sure that any agricultural product that's coming in, to the EU has to meet those standards in terms of the EU system. And the EU actually has quite strong, it involves very much a precautionary principle. So they can be quite stringent. It would, of course, be simpler if the whole of the UK had remained in the sanitary and phytosanitary standard system, but they didn't. Now, Northern Ireland could, of course, in the future, become an investment location, a very strong one, for European firms wanting access to the British market. But this is not greatly discussed, partly because one of the major political parties in Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party, opposed Brexit and opposes the Northern Ireland Protocol, which actually establishes this relationship between the UK, or rather the GB internal market and the EU single market applying in Northern Ireland. Now, if we move to UK trade modelling, and I've used the gravity model, which is a well-known model in terms of indicating the bias of trade towards countries which are close to the exporting and importing country. And in a sophisticated version of the trade model, the gravity trade model, Mayer, Vicard, and Zignano in 2018 showed that the single market has increased trade between EU members by some 109% for goods since it was introduced in around about 1992. It started to be introduced then. It's a progressive movement, with associated welfare gains reaching 4.4% for the average European country. In the case of the UK, this is a lower gain because it's a larger country. It's a 2.6% welfare gain. The study also concluded that the impact of Brexit would mean that the UK will be losing some 80% of that welfare gain from the single market. And also in terms of the gravity, the impact of the gravity of the gravity model, a PricewaterhouseCoopers meta-analysis of trade literature in 2017 found that gravity models suggested a 13% increase of UK trade with closer countries than was the case in the 1970s. In other words, the impact of gravity, of close proximity between the UK and the EU is more important than it was in the 1970s. The UK's dubious argument challenging this is that the gravity model of trade is more applicable to the short and medium run, but it might not hold up so well in the long run. How long is not suggested. I'm reminded of Maynard Keynes' comment about in the long run we're all dead. But also then, if we move on to the UK's geopolitical positioning, which has recently changed, the UK is pivoting to the Indo-Pacific. And in an attempt to actually make up for the loss of trade with the EU, I mean, the EU statistics, it's too early yet to have definitive figures, but a fall in exports of 15% from December to February of this year, to December 2020 to February 2021 has taken place. But the net trade benefits, especially in goods trade, of deals in East Asia and the Indo-Pacific are likely to be small and slow in coming. The UK government, for instance, estimates that the impact of the Australia trade deal that is recently announced will be done will be only a marginal 0.015% over 15 years. Similar estimates for a UK-US trade deal are around 0.06% of GDP. That is. However, the welfare impacts on UK livestock farmers in terms of the Australian deal, and conceivably also a US deal, would be substantial. It may be that the UK government is relying on strong service exports as part of its strategy. However, it's difficult to see how this can be translated in the more competitive services trade environment in the Far East. So there is a potential scenario of the UK rejoining the single European market. These economic trade realities that I've mentioned are likely to lead to a gradual recognition, at least they should lead, to a gradual recognition that the UK's trade and economic position could be enhanced by seeking, sometime during this current decade, to re-enter the EU single market, where they will be paralleling the position of Norway, for instance, that is in the single market, EU single market, but not in the customs union. However, any such initiative may encounter some political problems. One of these includes the UK's government position on the importance of legal sovereignty. This argument featured strongly in the Brexit debate. Leaving aside the fact that at the moment, Northern Ireland is under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, this sovereignty argument is misguided. If the UK, for instance, were to accept the single European market rules, then there needs to be some legal arbiter to ensure that the rules are applied fully, not only in relation to the UK, but also symmetrically in other parts of the EU. In other words, the ECJ protects would protect the UK as well as the rest of the EU. However, there are some other general political problems to closer relations with the EU, given that the UK has now left. Rejoining would obviously be more difficult. And one of these is how the EU will develop politically. If only limited progress is made towards federalization of the EU, then the possibility of the strong economic reasons would also probably be accompanied by a lessening of the political objections for the UK re-entering the EU single market, because it wouldn't be re-entering the EU as such. And that, as I say, could emerge during the next, or during this decade, actually, in the next 9 years, or even a shorter time period, as I will indicate. Progress on further EU integration depends strongly on Germany. And the position of the German Constitutional Court is quite important here. And in a variety of judgments over the past 3 decades rather, has demonstrated its concern that, for instance, the European Central Bank initiatives, such as continuous asset purchase programs, represent a backdoor movement towards an EU fiscal union. Therefore, it seems likely that one will only get fairly slow progress to further deeper political integration. And therefore, it would not actually threaten, apparently threaten, if the UK, if it were to move closer in terms of political economy via the single European market, move closer to the EU. So those fears would not emerge or be utilized as reasons for not joining the SEM, which is political reasons. In fact, in my own recently published book, British Business Banking, I suggested that the UK should perhaps move closer to the German model of a coordinated market economy and long-term bank funding of small and medium-sized enterprises. Indeed, the demand for SMEs for equity funding is only really advantageous for SMEs at limited points in their life cycle. So such a move towards the German model of SME funding and a coordinated market economy would strengthen the arguments for the UK re-entering the EU single market. So what may we conclude? Well, I think one point is that the ability of the UK to make up in the medium to long term, at least 15 years, for the loss of trade with the EU is negligible. It would be much more beneficial for the UK to rejoin the EU single market and expand its trade with its most obvious partner in close geographical proximity. Now, it is true that some regulatory drift may occur, and therefore the UK would drift further from the standards, technical standards imposed within the single European market. I suspect that that will not happen to a major degree, at least not in the medium term. And also the UK's absence from the UK single market, these factors could threaten this scenario that I'm arguing could take place. Nonetheless, in my view, that scenario, that rejoining the single European market for the UK, is likely to come forward for debate during the current decade. Perhaps in 4 years' time, when the protocol governing the relationship, this rather bizarre relationship between Northern Ireland and the EU and the UK has to be reviewed. And that would probably be really a useful time to say, okay, if we're going to continue with the current protocol with Northern Ireland being inside the single European market, why doesn't the rest of the UK, i.e. Great Britain, also then rejoin the single European market, which would have considerable economic advantages? So that's it.
Okay.
If there are any questions now, I'm happy to answer them, or we can wait until later. Up to you, Gordon. You're chair again.
I prefer that I had a whole bunch of ground rules, which I didn't see, that were on my original set of slides. But I prefer that we wait until the end and each person take about 20 minutes, which you did, which is very good. And we'll try to address the questions later, seeing how much time we have.
Okay.
Let's see, Nigel, I had some introductory material on Angelo. Okay. Angelo is going to talk about COVID-19, the single European market, the next generation EU, the future of Europe, and fiscal policy response by Professor Santagostino from, I have a phone call. Oh, dang.
Yeah, please mute your phone.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that. I'll just unplug it. I don't know what to do. If I had a fishbowl, I'd drop the phone into it. Anyway, Professor Santagostino is a world-class economist. His PhD is from Bocconi. He's an expert on European integration and has participated in a number of IAES conferences since 2012. He is assessing the future of the single European market in light of the complications arising from the COVID-19 pandemic and the adoption of the European Commission's proposal for a single European market program. This program provides for integrated measures and safeguards to strengthen the single European market, including a major focus on financial services. An important focus of the SEM program is on the standardization of practices in financial reporting, consumer protection, and product safety, as well as high quality economic statistics. The SEM program that's being funded to the tune of like 4.2 billion over the next 5 years, or 22 through 27, emphasizes the importance of entrepreneurship, labor mobility, and training. And a major focus of the SEM program is to encourage the inclusion of the young, women, and senior entrepreneurs. So with that introduction, Angelo.
Yes, good afternoon or good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to participate to this conference and this session. And thanks to Cathy Virgo and Brady for organizing this respective conference and the session. Well, I will mainly focus on single market and on the response of the EU to this pandemic. So actually, I will start from where Michael ended. I was very impressed in hearing from you, Michael, that what will be the dimension of the loss of welfare that UK will have to face, so 80% of the benefits will disappear in the next year. I guess that will be an important push for going back to the single market, so in the near future. Well, coming to the point of my presentation, well, I would like to start with the proposal for a single market program, which has been put forward by, as usual, by the European Commission and then approval by the European Parliament and the Council of the EU. It's a very big, wide program over the next 7 years of the period of 21-27, and is endowed with an amount of more than 4 billion euros. It is important because, in a certain sense, it's a unifying project, or unifying several programs which were realized separately until now. So now we have an integrated set of measures which will improve, the governance and so the working of the single market. And this is for goods, for services, including also the financial services. So, what this pandemic has put into evidence, but this was also put into evidence by the previous crisis, the Great Recession, put in evidence the importance of having a well-functioning single market. We can say that during the Great Recession, the ECB managed to save the euro, but the single market saved the European Union. It was a very important safety net, which allowed exchange to go on and somehow support our economies in spite of the economic difficulties of those years. And now somehow we face the same situation. Thanks to the existence of the single market, in spite of some initial difficulties, the flow of goods, services went on. And this was another safety net, allowing the economy to somehow go on, minimize, if we can say minimize, reduce better the impact of the pandemic. This program is made up of a very long and detailed regulation, which has been published some days ago on the official journal, official bulletin of the European Union. So, but its aim is making them better, include surveillance, a range of problem solving support to citizen and business, aiming to improve the competitiveness of the business, and with a special attention on small and medium enterprises. So here, I would remind that the single market after Brexit is made up of 450 million people. Before was 500 and something, and of about 25 million enterprises. Most of these, as we know, are small and medium. Then, in order to ensure to allow the best working of the single market, we need improving standardization and development of international and non-financial reporting of the standards. So this from the very briefly, of course, from the supply side, from the demand side. this program is oriented to ensure a high level of consumer protection, production safety, high level of health for human beings, but also animals, plants, because we are in a single market. That's why we need common rules, common health rules, in order to facilitate, to make possible the free circulation of people, animals, and plants. So this, as far as very briefly, as far as the single market program is concerned. I'll skip some of the slides and I go directly to the next generation EU. But this is a very big innovation. Big innovation because through this program, this program will be financed by the Commission, not in the budget, but borrowed on the capital market and borrowing. Well, it's not the first time that Commission go on capital market to borrow, but until now was done for a limited amount. So now we have a total amount of for next generation plus other program for 750 billion euros. So this is this next generation is a great opportunity for Europe, the great opportunity for its own modernization. Any one of EU countries needs to go through a process of modernization. Some more, some less. Italy, and let me tell some words, comments about Italy. Well, Italy is the country who has received more. Or we will receive, we will, because still the funds have to be delivered. We'll receive more than 200 billion euros, which is an extraordinary high amount. In order to spend this amount, our government has prepared a plan for recovery and the recovery and resilience plan. This plan was firstly elaborated by the Forte government, and then we had a new government coming in with Mario Draghi as premier. So this plan has been somehow reshaped and submitted to the European Commission at the end of April. The problem with Italy is that we need a huge process of reform in order to allow the benefits of a recovery plan, of the recovery and resilience plan, to be effective. And this is the main challenge. because we have to go through a huge modernization or reform of the public administration. Otherwise, we will not be able to spend in 6 years, because the time is precise and relatively short in 6 years. Then we need a reform of the public administration, of bureaucracy. So we need a reform of the justice, and reform also of our educational system, including the university. So this is a very big challenge. Of course, in order to win this challenge, we will need political stability. And you know that Italy is not a country who is an excellence in terms of political stability. Political stability in the sense of governance which lasts for a whole legislative period. So there are some incogniti around about the use of these funds, but this is a big challenge for Italy. It's a challenge that we cannot lose, because it is an opportunity that will not be back if we fail. So this is as far as next generation is concerned. Now, considering that just a few minutes are left, I will shift to the last part of my paper and my slides, and focusing on the EU fiscal policy response. So, as you know, when the pandemic broke out, the EU Council suspended the Stability and Growth Pact. This faced to the need for member states to increase the spending through deficit increase and through increase of the debt. Well, in case of Italy, unfortunately for us, our debt was already high, around 130% of GDP. Now is more than 150%. Luckily, through many difficulties and political debate, we had managed to keep the deficit relatively low. It was around 2.5% at the beginning of the pandemic. Now it's around 10%, which is a high amount. I remind that just before the starting of the process leading to the euro, our debt, our fiscal deficit was around 10% of GDP. So we are going back to that, to those years. Well, what will be what is the fiscal policy response? Here we have a communication of the Commission, who is giving some guidelines to member states for the conduct of their fiscal policy. Because this increase in debt and this high spending will continue through this year and probably next year. Only but at a certain point we will have to go back to the Stability and Growth Pact. We have to reintroduce rules. Which rules? Well, surely the Stability and Growth Pact need a change, needs a reform. The debate on which reform, how to reform it, has not yet started. In the meantime, the fiscal policies, as the communication indicate. In the meantime, fiscal policy should remain agile and adjust to the evolving situation. So the warning which comes from the Commission is that it's against the premature withdrawal of fiscal support, which should be maintained in this year and in the next year. Then we will discuss about the reintroduction and the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact. Last thing I mentioned very briefly, but as you know, the beginning of from 9 May, started the conference, the future of Europe, which will debate how to shape the European Union in the future, how to shape its policies. So this is an important forum also for debating how to reform and how to reintroduce at best the Stability and Growth Pact. Okay, this is all. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Gordon? Gordon, are you going to take it from here? You might be muted. Gordon Brady? I think you must be muted.
Sorry, Angelo, you have 5 more minutes if you wish to spend a little bit more time on any of your points. I know 20 minutes isn't enough for an Angelo Santagostino paper, but is there anything you wanted to emphasize as a parting shot, or? Okay.
Well, I could add something concerning the future of Europe, concerning this conference. But the character of this conference is that of being a bottom-up process. So, due to times and also for convenience, and will be organized as mainly as an online conference. And entities in various member states could organize, workshop and meeting conference to debate the issue. Well, but I think that the main issue is, will this conference take to the reform of the treaty, or will be limited to reshape the existing policy? Because if you want really to have a reform, also for instance, stabilizing, let's say, the next generation, so this possibility for the Commission to go on the capital market to borrow in order to finance a certain policy, we need a reform of the treaty, because we cannot every time go through this long process of ratification by the national parliament of member states. But the indication up to now that should be limited to reshaping the policies. So this will reduce surely the impact of the conference on the future of Europe. But being a bottom-up process, I imagine that proposal which imply a modification of the treaty will be put forward. Then the incognita is what will do member states, because in order to introduce reform and to change the treaties is a longer process through the intergovernmental conference, which also then after the agreement of the member states requires in some cases a referendum. This is what I could add to fill my last 5 minutes. Thank you, Gordon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Angelo. I was just wondering, is 4.2 billion euros, is that an adequate amount of money to undertake all the the programs that they are advocating. Over, it's 21 through 27. I had it wrong to 22, but
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
yeah.
You are referring to which part of my?
The single economic market. That commission, you were talking about the commission and their funding was 4.2 billion, wasn't it? I thought that's what you said. But
Well, I don't find the point you are mentioning.
was just to add.
In any case, we can discuss later, maybe.
Okay.
Question and
Okay.
answer.
Okay. I wanted to save everything to the end, but I was especially impressed by their emphasis on entrepreneurship and the inclusiveness aspect of the proposals, and the standardization of accounting practices and reporting. I mean, that's appeared to be what they were at. So all of those things I think are good to increase comparability in data between different countries. So, and therefore make them facilitate trade if they're on the same, if they're on the same metrics. So, okay. Let me turn to my paper and need to advance that a bit. And go ahead on down another one. It's on innovation-induced rent-seeking. Now, there's a big project going on by Daryl Hannon in the UK and Eikenson at Cato, and it's on free trade. And this was taken from a Cato paper that they did in 2019, which summarized a lot of what they were up to. So although economists tend to appreciate that trade enables us to specialize, and that by specializing we can produce more and thus consume more, trade policy is less informed by economics than it is shaped by matters of political economy. I want to add to that the notion of innovation-induced rent-seeking. Go ahead, flip. Next slide. Okay, and this is within the context of mercantilist reciprocity as a model for negotiation in treaties. Mercantilist reciprocity is based on the notion that you're trading things other than goods. You're trading, I don't want to be too graphic, but insults, threats of tariffs, threats of embargoes, threats of changing the definition of something so that you can no longer import the products of another country. I'm going to talk about positive sum or innovation-induced rent-seeking. Now, I had a paper back in Public Choice in the early 90s, which sounds so long ago, and also one in Cato about innovation-induced rent-seeking. The whole notion behind rent-seeking, I mean, the popular perception of it is that it's negative sum, that you have some group of coalition or individuals or powerful interest groups which are able to secure a special privilege which allows them to get a return on their, or get a price which exceeds marginal cost, thus creating a quasi-monopoly, which is transitory, but it's still, in many cases, it's enough to induce rent-seeking behavior, which has the potential, and certainly we saw this in California with the deregulation of airlines. Once they found out that you could fly from San Francisco to Los Angeles for some fraction of what it cost for the same distance. For example, for Catherine to fly from Atlanta to New York, then there was all kinds of pressure to deregulate airlines. So the notion of negative sum rent seeking is one perspective, only one side of it. And what I would argue, and I think many people would agree, that there are a number of areas in treaty negotiations involving rent seeking, positive and negative, but there is the potential for free trade advocates to somehow insert a provisions which would benefit which would benefit efforts toward free trade. And it would be by breaking down regulatory barriers by those who have the most advantage or most to gain from breaking down the barriers, the ones who would free up a market or open an opportunity. Now, rent seeking itself was founded in 1967 by Gordon Tullock, and he had a lot of trouble getting it published. Now, I don't think that if John Virgo and Catherine had been the market for Gordon Tullock's output, that they would have had any problem, because it was a very fundamental interpretation which springs from the fact that the rents and the cost isn't lost, it's just distributed or redistributed to somebody else or some other group. And I think the Virgos would have certainly recognized that, and it would have been in 1967 or prior to 1967. Tullock actually had a great deal of trouble. In fact, he was rejected by several journals ahead of prior to getting it in the Western Economic Journal. So I want to talk a little bit about the theoretical foundations of rent seeking and make the distinction between positive and negative sums, and to look at how treaty provisions might encourage or positive sum rent seeking. And next slide. Mercantilist reciprocity is the setting. Rent seeking itself is an inescapable element of mercantilist reciprocity and political theater in general that's involved in all of these negotiations. The goals of interest groups and politicians compete with governments' undertaking of political goals and national aspirations. Treaties are the products of strategies used in obtaining them, and the individual and collective goals pursued to obtain agreement. The objective of rent seekers is to create and protect the fruits of special privilege. Okay. Mercantilist reciprocity is characterized by the leveraged threats. I had pictures of what appeared to be President Trump in negotiation mode, in which the trade was taking place in terms of barbs or threats and that kind of thing. So there's an element of rent seeking there, obviously, as one tries to get the national interest or the interest of a group of prominent supporters to support you. So next. Innovation-induced rent seeking is that produces the spillover benefit or the externality of increased competition and drives both regulatory reform and free trade. The spillover benefits accrue from the destruction of monopoly rents, the expansion of markets, and the creation of new products. Sometime back, oh great, Francesco is going to be joining us. I had just been looking through his paper, and it's a masterpiece of great work there that would be a real shame to miss. So the formation of counter coalitions or incipient regimes consists of the politicians, the firms, the interest group that hope to drive market innovations through removal or adaptation or somehow avoidance of regulatory constraints. So the firms that are
presenting right now.
And you think the last speaker is still this Friday?
Hi, Francesco. It's Kathy.
Yes, I am here.
Yeah, hi. So I'm going to move you over to the plenary panel room, and you'll start talking when Gordon finishes. He's in the middle of his talk right now. So I'm going to move you over there and I'll follow. So hold, I'm going to move you over to that room.
Could you repeat? I don't understand what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to electronically move you from this room to the plenary panel room.
See.
Okay, all right.
Should I stay always in the panel or just my photography?
So you'll be moved in the room and you'll see all the other presenters.
No, because of course I have many things to do. So I would like to come back tomorrow.
Oh, no. The plenary panel is going on right now.
Oh, because I was told that was Saturday. You told me, maybe I'm wrong. In that case, I am ready now.
Yeah, no, it's ongoing right now. Yeah, because there's no sessions tomorrow. It's today. Yeah, and it's
Okay.
yeah, Angelo.
When you want to speak.
Yeah, Michael already gave his talk. Angelo gave his talk already, and Gordon is in the middle of his talk right now.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move you to that room. So hold on.
Okay. Accidente oggi. L'hanno anticipata.
free trade would be, we would hope, positive, a negative price change and increase in consumer surplus, and the distribution of goods and services now made available, the political consequences of such changes, and the unintended consequences, the breaking down of monopolies due to the implementation of the agreements themselves. Okay, next. Treaty provisions would be fairly obvious in some cases. Michael was talking about the definition of meat to based on point of or production origin of production. There are others which I discussed mentioned at the end. The next slide. So you can do an example of rent seeking to promote regulatory reform. Consider that treaty negotiations in the mercantilist reciprocity model involving two countries, one of which precludes some firms from employing particular cost-reducing innovations in the production process. This may be due to monopolization, cartels, patents, trademarks. We assume that the inefficient restriction was established and remained in place because the benefits a dominant coalition composed of bureaucrats, firms and workers, third-party public interest groups kept them there. Now, let's assume that an incipient regime, in other words, a coalition of rent seekers who are seeking to break down these regulatory barriers. Next. There is the graph, figure 1, and this is the standard graph. It shows the result of the counter coalition success compared with the competitive ideal of QN at sale price P per unit. QM units are now sold at a price PM, which is greater, and so the costs are associated with the net. So you create the telecost and Harburger cost associated by triangle H. These costs are associated with a net increase in rather than a diminution of social welfare, since the innovative products market would not have come into being in the absence of the rent seeking in the incipient regimes or counter coalitions. Therefore, rectangle T merely offsets the gain in producer surplus attributable to the creation of the new market. It does not constitute a waste of pre-existing surplus. That's the theoretical basis. So next slide. Triangle H should not be included in the welfare calculations at all. Triangle H merely represents foregone gains in consumer welfare that could have been realized in, see how my time is, oh goodness, I've already exceeded my time. At any rate, there's the discussion of that part, next slide. And that is that shows the third party effects of innovation induced rent seeking. Next slide. And then there is the discussion of that is a bit tedious to to go into here since I'm already over my time. Next slide. And this makes the obvious point about the spillover benefits of rent seeking because of the opening of new markets and the dismantling of old monopolized markets. Next. So my argument then is positive sum rent seeking should be recognized in free trade treaty negotiations, and in structuring them. It is of course true that economic rents are sought in articulating the provisions of trade treaties. For example, the UK and the EU, the US, and Mexico, Canada agreement, which replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement, all had these elements in them. There are many areas of trade negotiations which may be animated by positive sum rent seeking with the objective to level the playing field. Obvious examples include e-commerce, telecommunications, finance, antitrust regulations within the countries, product standards, as Michael has so clearly stated, and health and safety regulations, which offer as impediments. Okay, that's the end of mine, and I am overjoyed to see the visage of our patron saint, Francesco Forte, also here. So I will move on to introduce Francesco. It's a lengthy introduction. You can't get away with just a few words. As you may know, he is listed as emeritus professor since 1984 in the Department of Public Economics and Law at the University of Rome. Professor Forte may be referred to as emeritus, but this should not be confused with the word retired. It's an honor to introduce Francesco. Time simply doesn't permit an adequate introduction of this man. Francesco is known worldwide for his extensive writings as an academic economist and as a major scholarly contributor to the science of public finance, and his journalistic commentaries on fiscal and monetary policy. His professional career as an expert in the science of public finance and politics depends on how you date it, that would be after he finished his PhD until now, spans over 70 years. Next. He continues his weekly columns in such newspapers as Il Giornale, and which coincidentally he created and popularized an economic commentary section. He also writes for La Stampa and Panorama and Il Foglio. His bibliography includes 35 books, I think. You have to update frequently to keep up with his output, and over 350 papers in economic and science and applied cultural economics, ranging a vast area of his interest. While you may know that about his service as policy advisor for several Italian governments, the OECD, the EU, the UN, and the World Bank, you may have missed at least one. During the government of Prime Minister Benedetto Craxi, 1983 through 87, Francesco single-handedly led the Italian Socialist Party to fully embrace supply-side markets economics. So with those great accomplishments, let's move on to Francesco for his presentation. Thank you so much for coming. I had a short summary of it, but that's fine.
Thank you very much. I am pleased to speak here after this nice introduction of my career and of my paper. Let me start with one of my contribution, which was number one, the report of the EU Commission McDougall Monetary Union, in which we state, I am head the panel group, that the monetary union is a club of sovereign states, as in the public choice theory. Then we consider the rules of the suggested by the McDougall report. And the first rule suggested is monetary stability, both against inflation and against deflation. The third, please, I need the third McDougall report points. The third is that is needed also a fiscal policy by the European Union Commission budget. However, the Maastricht Treaty compromise, slide 4, on monetary union after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 89 and the German reunification was without fiscal policy by the European Union budget because they were in a hurry and they wanted just to put, limits to the German power by putting up the monetary union. So that instead of a monetary policy, there was a compromise. Next, please, next. Okay, coordination of domestic fiscal policy by countries with a limit of 60% debt GDP ratio as a final target and 3% limit to the budget deficit with a 0.06 final target. The principles of coordination of domestic fiscal policy by countries with the parameters, which parameters of 60% as a final target and 3% upper limit to the budget and a 0.06 final target was done by a particular control by the Commission by a fiscal pact signed by each member state, controlled by the EU Commission, with a procedure of please 7 and 8 fiscal pact. Please 7 with the procedure of infraction against the member states which shall not accomplish. So there is a constraint. However, there was a symmetry between states with excessive deficit, which should contract the deficit, and states with surplus, which should expand. So that the procedure of inflation theoretically, in principle, should be done against, for instance, Germany in case of a surplus. The divorce between the mandate, excuse me. The mandate of ECB, European Central Bank, European Central Bank of Euro area, was symmetric, as I said, as there was also in McDougall, with monetary stability both against inflation and deflation. Top inflation rate 2%, low 1%. And the rule of 2% price increase is top rate of the European Central Bank. Aware there was also the principle of divorce between the central bank and the treasury. ECB cannot buy public debt when issued by the treasuries of the member state, cannot buy from national trades as operator of last states. This principle was, of course, very important. It is in other countries, like particularly United States. The 4 presidents of the European Central Bank are the Dutch former Minister of Labor, Duisenberg, which represented Germany until 204, then Jean-Claude Trichet, former Bank of France, until 11, then Mario Draghi, Italy, former central banker of Italy, until mandate for European Bank until 18. Then Christine Lagarde, against the French former Minister of Finance, up to 16 up to 16. Let us start now with the Duisenberg practices of deflationary policy to help euro to survive. Euro-dollar in the 5-year maximum minimum, as you can see from those tables, was not an easy task to be accomplished because only in the last year there was a tiny minimum, while in 22 and 21 and 23 there were a situation in which the new currency of Europe had a rate below the dollar, which was a terrible problem. The deflationary policy of Duisenberg did help euro to survive, but growth of GDP was damaged everywhere, including Germany, except Spain, as those tables clearly show. The next governor, Trichet, had no problem with the euro-dollar rate, but had to face the German surplus and, furthermore, a great European banking crisis related to the great crisis by US due to the derivatives. Some states in Europe had a huge deficit to hide their banks. But ECB is not allowed to buy debt issue by the states. So Trichet did ask Euro government to finance banking fund, to finance government, to finance banks. The fund had the task of recapitalization of banks too. This fund, created by the countries member of European Union, Monetary Union, was named European Financial Stability Facility, and did finance indirectly government, directly governments of Greece, Portugal, Ireland, which made huge deficit to save their banks. However, the huge deficit of Spanish cajas, saving banks, did not need a government aid, because the government of Spain had a very low debt GDP ratio, and therefore no deficit problem. So there was a direct financing. Anyway, the effects were for Germany some growth or balanced growth, for France growth, for Italy depression, for Spain banking crisis, but later on at the end of Trichet, with this dual situation, dual because some country could grow, some other country did not grow, and particularly problems were for the southern countries, Southern Europe countries. There was the problem of Draghi, because there was the risk of euro crisis because of this duality and the weakness of a big part of the monetary union. Draghi, therefore, pronounced a famous statement: we should do whatever it takes to save Europe. What was the realization of Draghi? Quantitative easing by a European Central Bank, consisting in purchase of government public debt on the secondary market in proportion to their share of participation to ECB. In case of A rating by rating agency, purchase of obligation of other public entities with A rating, purchase of private important financial entities with A rating. And the situation improved, but Germany had originally condition favorable to grow, but there was no growth because monetary policy, as in the McDougall report clearly is written, creates conditions favorable to growth, but cannot by monetary policy generate growth. Therefore, there was an output gap in the production of capacity, productive capacity, due to the Great Depression, to which the European monetary policy was unable to provide. Artificially low interest rate generated by the quantitative easing, on the other hand, distorted the equilibrium between savings and investment, so that there was an asymmetry which was, in a sense, forecasted by the McDougall report. And the institution of European Monetary Union are, up to this point, clearly incomplete. However, in the next period, in the 20s, we had a new war, not the Cold War with the reunification of Germany, but the COVID war. And Therefore, two big changes were adopted. One in the quantitative easing, where instead of considering the shares of Euro states proportional to their ECB shares, everything was done to help the states against the virus by a monetary policy of quantitative easing. So the quantitative easing became easier. Go back, please, a moment. And what is more important, fiscal policy of a temporary fiscal policy, big, huge, by the European Commission, was introduced by grants to the EU states on regional funds and loans at low interest rate and long maturity by separate EU budget annexed to the budget of the European Commission, which must be balanced. But there is an annexed separate budget with a warrant by the European Commission budget, where it is possible to make loans. Loans are also done by a temporary unemployment insurance European fund. Again, this is a temporary fund, while in the theory of Draghi, at least, and generally in the architects of monetary policy for the monetary union, this fund should be structural. However, with the reform to make the unemployment rules and therefore the employment laws similar, to avoid that some country has unemployment because of the rigidity of its labor contracts. There is also, in addition, the European Stability Mechanism measure of European Financial Stability Fund, which, however, up to now has not been adopted by nobody country adopted it. The question is now whether those temporary measures shall become 21, please, shall become permanent. And my answer is similar to the analysis done by the economist which introduced me, because I believe that the European bureaucracy shall like to become, to have those funds as permanent, because their power, of course, in this way is reinforced. And the rent-seeking interest groups will have something to do in the, something more to do in the European Parliament and in the Commission. Therefore, there will be rent seeking as a principal factor of making those funds permanent. But we have seen that rent seeking is not necessarily a bad result. This is not the conclusion, however, because it's not true that with the fiscal policy described and the other funds like the fund to hide banks in crisis, or the fund for the unemployment, are not enough to say that Euro fiscal policy system or Euro institutions are without flaws. A great reform indeed is needed. The Parliament of European Union must become the Parliament of the Euro area, while now is not a Parliament of the European area. It's the Parliament of all the countries member the Parliament of the entire European Union area and not of the Euro area. The change implies that normally the Parliament shall be Euro area Parliament, and if needed, occasional extra session for non-Euro states would be added. This because if European Union monetary policy and European Union as such in general are clubs, we have not necessarily to oblige all the countries of the European Union to choose to be member of the European Union monetary system. There can be a snake of the rates between the country non-Euro and the country Euro of Europe, which allows them to be, to be together. Another important reform, the final true reform, it is the decision making of the European Council, which is the group of ministers member of the Euro area, should become a formal institution with ad hoc regulation of its decision. Now is an informal club without rules for it. Therefore, paradoxically, two countries, still till now, Germany and France, really direct the monetary union because they are more important and have made an agreement to cooperate among them, and the other countries in a sense, have not a majority in the club of the European Union, even if this could happen if there were rules of decision making of the EU Council and Commission for the Euro as a primary system and extended to the non-Euro European countries as an additional system. Now, I state that this, in a sense, should be a constitutional change by an EU ad hoc regulation in the terminology of European Union means first rank law. If this law is subscribed by all the countries of European Union, obviously we will have the final true reform, and the Euro shall be complete as an institution which until now was uncompleted. Now I have finished, and you have time to raise objection or make comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. We have a question out in the chat room. I don't know if you can see it there, Gordon. It's a question posed by Roland Barty. Or Roland, you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
The question, I am ready to ask, to respond to the questions, if there are.
Roland, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah.
If I may, it's mainly directed to, I think, Angelo Santagostino. It's about the Tinbergen rule. There is a controversy in Germany, and I'm attached to the leading economist, I would say, or at least the most known economist, who is Clemens Fuß of the IFO Institute. And he says, if the European Green Deal intends to support or finance economic recovery only when the measures have an effect on environmental issues, that will not work. The Tinbergen rule, I think you are economists all around, says that in order to obtain a policy outcome in various fields, one must have one instrument for each of the fields. So I would want to know if someone of you has an answer to that or has thought about this. Thank you.
Angela?
Well, you mentioned the Green Deal. No? This is one of the priorities of the European Commission, which was set at the beginning of the mandate of the von der Leyen Commission, jointly with another priority, which was digitalization. Huh?
Yeah.
Then these two prior when we were then because of the COVID crisis, this new program, next generation, was set up, and these two priorities the Green Deal and digitalization came into the next generation. So now countries have submitted their resilience and recovery plan to the European Commission. On this resilience and recovery plan, and most of them, and especially the German one, and I think you are thinking to the recovery plan of Germany. They are focused, on these two issues. So you question that they might not be so effective and consequently not have an economic impact. Well, I think that it depends on how in the recovery plan, the resilience and the recovery plan are made up of a series of projects which will have to be approved by the Commission and then the Council. There is a somehow complicated procedure, but then will be strictly monitored, and the fund will be released according to the working of the project, according to the good implementation of and management and running of the project. So my impression is that as far as this project will be implemented and realized according to in a good way, let's say appropriately, we will have an economic impact. But thinking to some project related with, for instance, the circular economy. No? Why circular economy? Circular economy is supposed to considered important economic effect. Represents also a way to address climate change. So my impression that we have a big opportunity is in the hand of us, whether or not this project will be effective for the European economy. And I was mentioning in my presentation the program for the European market. Well, the program for the single European market is a way to make the single market more effective, and also more effective in relation to the project that will be implemented through the next generation program.
Thank you. What I was hearing is that there is a taxonomy set up in relation to projects and programs. And if you mention circular economy might be on the top list, and I don't really know, but creating jobs is not as high. So this would be my concern. Are we focusing on one issue, which is climate protection, or are we focusing on recovery? If you can do both, as you say, it's wonderful. But if you cannot, this taxonomy doesn't really help. That's the argument, as I said, of those leading German economies. Anyhow, it's...
Yes, because in Germany, the case of a German recovery plan is a plan which is particularly focused,
Yep.
on green economy, which might be a good thing, but also could generate the problem that you have that you have mentioned, but I think that important is to reactivate the economy to generate a certain growth rate, and a higher growth rate and generate more employment
Yep, thank
through
you.
contamination
Let's-
in other sectors.
Yeah, can we move on to Michael?
Yeah, I just make a quick comment on this issue of the Tinbergen rule? One of the problems is whether you try to define green investment ex ante or ex post. I mean, clearly, if you try to define it ex ante, it is very difficult because you're talking about a broad range of investments that might have some impact in terms of some sort of positive environmental impact. Ex post, it is easier, I suppose, to have a metric which would relate to the impact on net carbon. So you could do it that way. So there's going to be a problem if you try to define green investment too specifically. As I say, you can certainly deal with it ex post by a single metric of net carbon.
Yes. Francesco, did you want to comment on the discussion?
Yes, because I know the Stuttgart program by Ursula von der Leyen, which considers not only as a green thematic, the save the planet, but also to save the history of Europe, or in general, of the countries considered. Therefore, has introduced a particular system of railways which go around in Niedersachsen in the various areas of historical interest, castles, rivers, and so on, because the idea of saving the planet in this Ursula von der Leyen theory means to save the planet not only as a physical entity, because would be a nonsense, but as our human entity, to save human entity which lives in this physical entity, which means the superiority of the human capital on the physical capital. This is the theory of Ursula von der Leyen. You know, I don't know whether it is the theory of all the Germans. What I know, it is that many people don't understand at all this big difference, which I too raised in a paper on the theory of Ronald Coase, in which I make a reasoning about those two values and the transaction between them.
Okay. Well, that was very interesting. Good. Any other questions? Francesco had a 22-page, densely single-spaced paper with many insights. If there's any comments on Francesco's paper, that would be good. And Angelo had a very fine paper, and Michael did. So perhaps the audience would have some comments on each of them. Do any of the paper presenters have comments on the others who presented papers?
Yeah, maybe I have a comment on Francesco's. One of the problems with Francesco's reforms is that, particularly on the European Parliament, is of course the whole point of the euro was that every member of the European Union is eligible and is supposed to be moving towards the adoption of the euro as their currency. So that's partly the reason why the European Parliament will probably stay as it is. I doubt very much if the European Parliament would agree to having, I mean, it's perfectly possible for them to have sessions for the euro area. That would be perfectly possible. But the idea of having the European Parliament is simply for those who have adopted the euro, and then you have some add-on for the others, really goes against the whole notion that the idea of the euro is that it's open to every other country within the EU to actually join it. In fact, they're encouraged to do so. The other issue about, I think he's right, about that you do need treaty change. I mean, as I indicated in my paper, I think one of the barrier is not so much barrier to fiscal policy. It's not so much rent seeking in this particular case, but it's the German Constitutional Court. The German Constitutional Court, and it is very important in Germany, is set against any kind of drift towards a fiscal policy. Having said that, if you have treaty change, then yes, you could introduce a fiscal policy. It would mean the German constitution would also have to change. But again, that's perfectly possible. The issue, therefore, really relates to the political impetus and the strength of the politics towards further integration, and particularly and specifically in relation to fiscal policy. But at the moment, I don't see that there's that strong an indication. So although despite the fact that the UK has left, I'm a federalist, and therefore for me, I would want to see a fiscal policy, and we've recommended that in a paper which we've now sent to the ECB and to the European Parliament on a change of mandate for the ECB, and we've mentioned that one thing we do need is a fiscal policy.
Well, I believe, first of all, I didn't say that the reforms, the final reform, shall be realized. I adopted arguments to assume that it's possible that will happen. But if it happens or not, it depends from the rent-seeking theory of Gordon Brady. I mean, how much rent-seeking there will be in one case and how much there will be in the other case. Actually, one is this. The other is historically, we have seen that we need great leaders to do reforms. Not only the rationality of reforms, but what a famous Italian economist of the beginning of this century, socialist liberal as myself, Giovanni Montemartini, who invented the theory of the political entrepreneur. We need a political entrepreneur, which may be a group, but also a single personality. This, after the war, we had many political entrepreneurs in the European countries. For Italy, there was De Gasperi, and for Germany, there was an impressive, important man. Also for France, so that it was possible to realize something which was unthinkable before, in the sense that all the organization previously did not take place, and there were two wars.
Any more comments or questions? We have 1 minute left.